Hi,
Hello there.
how are you today?
Um, hmm, yeah, I'm tempted to just say good and how are you, but actually that would be just another way of Anyway, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I see we're both in space today.
Yes,
hmm
yes, both in space. Where are you?
I'm in a spaceship looking out at what looks like some exoplanets. Where are you?
I don't know where I am at, but I watched the Three Body Problem, which was
Oh,
pretty
no,
awesome. Have you seen it?
not yet. It's on my list, but to me, it looks like you're near Jupiter.
Oh, it might be Jupiter.
Mhm.
But yeah, obsessed. I couldn't stop. I binge watched it on the weekend. It was really good.
That's
If you like
amazing.
sci-fi,
Yeah,
then it's good. Anyway, yeah.
that's definitely on my list of things to do to watch. And yeah, I mean, one of these episodes we will talk about space and AI and all that stuff. But today's not that day. Today is an exciting day because Iron, you've written a book.
Yes, I have. I've written a book titled "A Practical Guide to Trauma-Sensitive Research: Integrating Trauma-Informed Frameworks into the Qualitative Research Life Cycle." Sorry, it's a mouthful.
No, it sounds very exciting, and it's something that I think we really need in the research space and the user research space. And it's great from my perspective to see and have an expert like you, who's a Gestalt trained therapist and a user researcher, write this book. I think it's going to be very important and informative and amazing for the community. So I really want to talk about that with you today. So I've got some questions for you, and I thought we could do what we do with our other guests, and I ask the questions, and then you can also guess if it's me or ChatGPT, and we'll play that game too. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I think like before we get into the book and sort of what the book is about, I just want to ask you so that our audience understands what trauma is. Are you able to explain what trauma is?
Okay, so and this answer, you ask different clinicians, they will answer this question differently. How I answer it: trauma is a nervous system reaction that it's activated when there's no actual threat or risk for harm in their environment, but because of historical experiences of experiencing dangerous or threatening, our nervous system stores sensory information. And when we re-experience those information, such as sounds, smells, taste, sight, then the nervous system gets activated, and that is like the part that's then distressing for the person who's experiencing the effects. So trauma can, it's not the event that happens to you, but actually what happens after, right? Because or didn't happen after, right? Something bad happened, like the classic example, a car accident, right? And you have someone there supporting you through that process of waiting for the ambulance can be so support you through that process and not get trauma, potentially. You never know, because it's also dependent on your history. But if there isn't any support and you're just there on your own, your nervous system might really store. And again, this doesn't apply to all events, but there's a potential for that. And I think also what's important to understand is that trauma is not necessarily a single event. It can also be like more pervasive, like an ongoing process of traumatization. But the traumatization is not so severe that you don't realize. Any type of abuse that's ongoing long term falls under the category. Any type of isms like racism, ableism, homophobia fall under this category, and it's usually conceptualized as microaggressions. Like lots of them then create a wound. Like also the word trauma, all it means is wound, and it can be a physical wound that's also called trauma, but it also can be like a psychological wound. Very long answer.
No, that's great. Thanks for explaining that. So if we do the game part of this, was that question me or was it ChatGPT?
I think that might have been you.
Okay. I'm gonna, in this version of the game, I'm gonna tell you how many you got right at the end.
Okay.
So if that's okay, because it's me and you, and just so otherwise you know me so well, I don't want to bias it. Okay, so the next question is, what does it mean to be a trauma-informed researcher?
Okay, what does it mean to be a trauma-informed researcher? So that's a difficult question, right? Because we don't have the overlapping two fields yet. They are not really defined. They are evolving. It's really new, and I think informed implies the level of, like, you're a trauma-informed psychotherapist, for example. What it implies, you have a lot of understanding of trauma theory, and you have a lot of clinical practice of how to work with that, right? So this is why I thought maybe the word itself is like a little bit misleading, because it expects researcher to really have lots and lots of experience, and it's just literally impossible at the moment. So that's why I introduced the term sensitive, trauma sensitive research, which I conceptualize as being aware of what trauma is, understanding basic key concepts, and having some kind of toolkits to make sure not to harm anybody who's in a research session, right? So, if you think of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So, and I had the same experience when I started out. I realized, okay, a lot of my clients who come and see me are traumatized. So I started learning about trauma, and what happens is, like, first you kind of overestimate your skills and capacities, right? And then you quickly realize how little you actually know, and then you start building up knowledge, and then you and practice, right? This is the important bit. It's not just knowledge, it's also the practice and application of some of these theories that then eventually help you to move forward. And just for context, I have a couple of thousands of hours experience of sitting with people who were traumatized.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's one of the reasons why I know we know each other, but that's one of the reasons why objectively I think you're the perfect person to write this book, because you seem to be one of the very few people with that Venn diagram overlap of being a researcher and a therapist, with that experience of sitting with people with trauma for thousands of hours. So that question, was it Femma or was it ChatGPT?
Oh, this is really tough one. I almost want to say Femma, but then it could be ChatGPT. Femma. I think that was you.
So if we get into your book, are you able to provide an overview of your book?
Yeah, sure. So there is an introduction, which is written by one of my lovely colleagues and peers, Maya Damour, and she's like she's the apologies. She is the founder and the director of the PAL Project, which is a charity that helps people who are traumatized to access martial arts in a contained and safe and trauma-informed space. So she has written the foreword and paraphrases some of the elements. Then there's an introduction, and there are two parts where I talk in the introduction. I talk a little bit about why this book and how I came to write this book, with the experience of first hearing about trauma-sensitive research and then realizing, oh shit, there's nothing out there that's actually based on trauma theory, right? It's then split into two parts. The first part is trauma theory. So I'm trying to go a bit, and this is the tricky bit, because we only have like certain amount of attention span, and here's like 6 chapters on the absence of diversity and difference in trauma theory and what it means. Like if you look at clinicians that are influential, most of them are white.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at people whose voices are heard, most of them are white. So I'm trying to point that out, that influences and biases our perspective on trauma. For example, racism. It's a trauma. Poverty is a trauma that we are going through, but it's like, according to the theorists, it's not really like included. There are activists who are trying to include that, but anyway. So it's a bit of like the flavor on that. And then what is trauma is one of the questions I address. And then also like activation and responses, understanding the difference between standard, just regular stress, and traumatic stress, as well as dissociation, and what it means and how it manifests. And then also secondary traumatic stress, which is also called vicarious traumatization, which means like if we listen to traumatic data from a research participant, it has the potential to traumatize us, the researcher. It's really important to understand, and a lot of people do, but what to do about it, not to get traumatized, that's where some of the different, where the practice is differing from what is actually currently out there. Second part then goes into the research life cycle and what it means, like using the UK government framework, like with its stages, and how to, from commissioning, writing a brief, training and preparation, screening recruitment participants, creating guidance and information sheets like discussion guides, etc., doing the research, analyzing the data, and then reporting the findings. Like, I'm going through these processes and how to make sure that you are trauma informed. And one of the key elements I'm proposing, and this is like in therapy, we have clinical supervision, which means that we speak to, to someone who's more experienced to make sure that what we are doing is ethical. Right? So there's this constant exchange between a supervisor and a therapist. And if you're working under any of the governing body, you have to do that, because it really is a support for the clinician to offer the best possible therapeutic support, and also to make sure the client is safe, right? So, and I think this is really, because that helps also with understanding how not to harm participants more. Yeah. And then there's a conclusion of maybe we should move towards trauma-sensitive organization, but again, this is a whole nother issue.
It sounds really great, and I think it definitely sounds like something the field could really benefit from that level of expertise, especially the part about supervision. And I've had my own instances as a researcher, and instances and experiences of that kind of, I think you called it vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, from hearing stories from participants, and it can be really distressing. So having that kind of process in place to manage that, I think would be super useful for many organizations. So was that question me or was it ChatGPT?
I want to say you again.
Okay. So the next question is, what motivated you to write about, and the question is trauma-informed research, but we can also say trauma-sensitive research, which is what you've called it. So feel free to answer either or one of those.
Yeah, I think it's pretty it's still called trauma-informed research, so it's absolutely fine to call it that. It's just a suggestion to reframe it. But sorry, what was the question?
So the question was, what motivated you to write about trauma-informed research?
So yes, so there were two reasons. One, the information that was provided, I thought was problematic, and putting researchers at risk to harm others or get traumatized themselves. So that was the main thing that I've been seeing that was concerning. So and then I thought, okay, what can I do about it? And so I wrote a paper first, 5,000 words essay, and of course nobody was interested first because it's a lot of words to read, and again, reading theory is boring, right? But because it fell flat, I thought, okay, what can I do with it? So I wrote an article for the UXPA magazine, and they published it in December last year. And I then felt somehow a bit more energy when that happened. I was like, oh, there is interest out there. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to double down now. So I wrote a whole manuscript, which then went through a peer review process with Routledge. And I have submitted now the final manuscript, and it's not entirely clear when and how it will be available for purchase, but it's in the process of getting into the world at some point, hopefully this year, but we'll see. Depends.
That's amazing. It's amazing that they published it, and when that happens, I think it will be really great for the community to be able to get their hands on the book. So hopefully we should see it in the near future, I guess.
Yeah. Near future, hopefully. I don't know the timelines. Don't want to share correct information, but I can link we can link the article on trauma-sensitive research.
Yeah, that would be great. We can put that in the notes. So that question, was that me or ChatGPT?
You.
Okay. So the next question is, can you share some key strategies or techniques from your book that researchers can employ to ensure their work is trauma-informed?
Okay, so one of the most important things I wanted to get across in the book is to get supervision from a clinical supervisor, somebody who's trained in psychotherapy, somebody who's trauma-informed and working in the field, because that is already like really, really helpful. And having said that, again, it might not be enough. The other things to really understand or be aware of, I think, is that some of the interventions to help with containing trauma are so against our natural way of how we usually engage with research participants, right? And that awareness in itself, it's like a key critical skill that I think needs to be, practiced and learned by researchers within their communities. For example, one of the biggest misconceptions is that when somebody's traumatized and wants to tell their story, that we listen empathically, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's not okay to listen. We always have to listen, but retelling the trauma narrative can really activate your nervous system
Mhm.
as the participant, but also affect you, with the risk of vicarious traumatization. So one of the critical skills that you learn in, trauma-informed psychotherapy is to interrupt the trauma narrative, right? Because here's the thing: if something bad happened to you, you want to talk about it and you want to tell the story so people can hear it, right? And it is a really difficult skill to ask people then to pause and to slow down and not do it, right? Because it's almost like you're silencing them in some way. And so it needs a real, you need some really attuned soft skills to be able to do that.
Mhm.
And how you usually do it in trauma-informed psychotherapy is you always say at the beginning, like, is it like you seek consent, right? Is it okay if I interrupt you, for example? But, if something comes up that's difficult, and then it's also easier to interrupt because, usually participants are okay to agree, right? Because when you explain to them, it can be distressing when we talk about stuff that's difficult. I would really like to slow it down. Are you okay with that? And most of the time they will. If not, then it's another thing to explore and to explain further.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, the waffle on the
No,
waffle.
that's really interesting. I've got some follow-up questions on that.
Yeah.
Before we go to the follow-up question, was that question me or ChatGPT?
You.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just really interested in this interrupting trauma because, like you said, the kind of almost default position is to let people share their story and to hear them, and so there must be a fine balance between understanding when someone is getting re-traumatized or traumatized versus they're just sharing something. And you said there's a lot of soft skills that require that. So how do you work out when to intervene, when to stop, as a clinician? And then the follow-up question to that is then how does that translate to user research if all these researchers are doing trauma-informed research?
So again, this is why practice is really important, right? And in practice, within you start practicing in psychotherapy training. You have triads, 3 people together. One is the therapist, one is the client, and one is an observer, and then you practice, right? And within the practice, you actually learn how to attune to yourself, to your own body and your nervous system. And because if your nervous system gets activated, there's a likelihood the participant's nervous system is going to get active. You need to be really attuned to your own responses and reactions. And based on them, you can, hypothesize when it's time to interrupt. Again, and there are different models. Some people don't have like a connection to the nervous system, and that doesn't exclude them. It's just finding a workaround, right? And different models. There's the window of tolerance, for example, which helps us to understand, is it just stress or is it like traumatic stress,
Mhm.
Or the polyvagal theory debated again. It's these are just concepts and developed by white people.
Mhm.
Doesn't always apply. Doesn't always apply to all differences and
Mhm.
diversities that there are out there, like including, for people with disabilities or people who are autistic or neurodivergent. It might be a bit different, but in essence, these are very good theories to conceptualize some of the ways of the nervous system and how it activates.
Mhm. Okay. Um, So the next question is, what potential ethical considerations should researchers be mindful of when conducting research with individuals who have experienced trauma?
So I think the most important aspect is really to be aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, despite knowing so much about trauma, right? I still get surprised how people react,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So overestimating your skills is a real risk for your own well-being,
Mm-hmm.
because if you get into a situation where you hear someone, you know, dysregulating in the session, that can really affect your self. So you know, I think that's the key ethical problem, that, you know, we tend to overestimate our skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important one, because I have quite a few concerns around this. I keep hearing in many spaces where I've worked, where people are like, oh yeah, we're doing trauma-informed research. Oh, this person's doing a talk on trauma-informed research. And I understand that the people who are providing the talk, they caveat by saying they're not necessarily therapists, they're not clinicians, but then, you know, they go into the kind of the theory of how it works and how it should be applied, and already you can imagine that there is that Dunning-Kruger effect where there's an overestimation of people's abilities. Like somebody could, on the receiving end of that, could say, oh, I've listened to this seminar, now I can go and apply this in practice. And like you mentioned, that level of rigor that exists in psychotherapy with the triads and the training and the hours and hours of clinical training does not apply to user research, just in the same way that, you know, anyone thinks they can do user research within an organization, and it's not in the same level of rigor that scientific research outside of companies and government organizations happens, with the ethics and the consent and it being mandatory, and, you know, being kind of part of regulatory bodies and ensuring that it's all by the books. It seems like when it comes to user research, that level of rigor just falls by the wayside. And for me, that I find that really, as a scientist and like talking to someone who's also a clinician, these areas overlap in user research, that level of rigor just does not happen, and then that people overestimate their abilities. And I've been to like external talks that are, you know, that people that you pay money for, which I went to last week, where people are talking about hypotheses and how, you know, their teams, they ask their team if the hypotheses have been matched or not. And I'm thinking, but surely the data should indicate that. So it's these things, these little nuances within our own field, I feel could massively harm people, you know, especially the participants. And so, yeah, so I think it's really important what you're saying in terms of that, the ethical, one of the biggest ethical considerations being that Dunning-Kruger effect, because I see it in many areas, and one of them is especially trauma-informed. And with trauma-informed, you know, that has the impact for the most harm, I feel like, you know. So yeah, so I think that's really an important factor to consider for anyone who wants to get into this space. So to go back to our game, was that me or ChatGPT?
You.
Okay. So in your experience, what are some common misconceptions researchers may have about trauma and its impact on participants?
So one of them is definitely the, you know, letting the trauma narrative unfold, right? And that is a big one, I think, that I really tried to, that's why it was so elaborate on the theories and all of that, to explain that we have to have skills in halting that in a session. And I'm just thinking, that's the main, I think, for me, that was the most important thing. And misconceptions, yeah, something around also that trauma is not one single thing, right? That it presents in one specific type. It presents so different in different contexts. And sometimes what looks like, you know, something completely different is actually a trauma response. So it's like really having like some, attunement to the possibility of understanding what's going on in the research session.
So was that question me or ChatGPT?
You.
Okay.
So, and one thing to add, like, I was trying in the book to address this with a case study that I've put in the second part, that goes through, the process of like autism assessment service, AI-assisted autism assessment service. So basically, some of the difficulties in the world around artificial intelligence within mental health and the regulations that are evolving around that, which will put anything that's health related and AI related under specific regulations, particularly within the EU. And, the autistic community being particularly vulnerable for trauma due to the differences in walking through, getting through life. And it's a higher percentage of the population that has experienced trauma. So, and this case study, although fictional, is based on real clinical experiences in completely altered ways. Right. So because obviously I can't disclose any information about what happened in sessions or what kind of project. But that's how I incorporated that.
So my understanding of that is you kind of anonymized and changed a lot of details and amalgamated things to make them fictional, but they are rooted in clinical experiences.
Yes, and of course I've thought consent.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you address power dynamics and potential re-traumatization within the research process, especially when working with vulnerable populations?
So as the researcher or as the therapist, right, we hold power, which is role power, right, not personal power. And this is really important to distinguish because your gender, your race, your identity will influence power, like and it's a complicated process, and it's like being aware that me as a white presenting male in the research session has an impact on the other person, right? And how can I work with that without causing more stress, right? So, and there's no clear answer, right? It's like the concept that I go to is intention versus impact. It doesn't matter what the intention was if the impact was re-traumatization.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, and I think it's a very important point about role power. I guess, like, technically in our dynamic right now, even though I'm the brown female, because I'm asking the questions, I'm holding the power in this role. Whereas if you're the clinician and I'm the client, then you've got that power, as you said, as white presenting, although you mentioned you identify as someone from a Middle Eastern Muslim background. Am I right in that? But because of how you present, there might be also a perception of who you are. So there's that whole, it's very complicated, isn't it, when it comes to power dynamics? And there's so many intricacies in it.
And this is the thing, because sometimes you might get called racist. Like I might get called racist, or what I've said was racist, right? And what's the default is that we go to a place of, no, I'm not racist. No, right? So trauma informed means, okay, I'm sorry, like, please help me understand what I did that was racist so I can stop doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's not about proving, or like, somebody experienced something as racist, right? And my job is not to go to a place of, no, I'm not, but to understand what it was that activated that trauma, right? So in research settings, it's more difficult, but it's like these things can crop up, and how do you respond? Are you going to a place of defensiveness, or are you what are you going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So that question, was that me or ChatGPT?
You.
So this is sort of the last question, and then I'm just going to have a general question at the end to wrap up. So how do you envision your book contributing to the broader dialogue surrounding trauma-informed care and research methodologies?
So my hope is, right, why I did this all is, I don't know if you hear the snoring in the background. That's my dog.
No, I don't.
Okay, good. The filter is working well. So the reason why I wrote this book is, I really want to protect my communities who are more likely to be traumatized through engagement with any kind of public service or activity. That was my driver. And that involves researchers as well as participants, and again, there's a risk of both getting traumatized if there isn't, accurate information. And this is there might be info, so like it might be already dated what is in the book, because we keep evolving and we keep learning, right? So but given what was out there, I think this is probably the closest to accuracy of, like, understanding and conceptualizing trauma in a easy to understand way. Let me caveat it. So but again, it's like, we are all human beings, and any kind of theory is evolving over time. So
yeah, and it sounds like it's come from a real place of care and compassion. You invested time and energy and effort in writing this book because you want to ensure that no harm happens to participants or to researchers, and that is practiced in a very safe, or as safe way as it can be. And I think that's really commendable, that you've done that.
Right, no harm. Like so it's like we can't exclude harm entirely, right? There's always a risk that something happens in a session that is unpredictable, but I really wanted to reduce as much as possible the risk for it. Right? And then also, if things happen, how to react without creating more harm. Because things might happen throughout, and we wanted to make sure there's information on how to respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, there's no guarantee that anything we do is harm-free, but if we can mitigate and reduce that, I think that's very important. And to be able to practice as a safer way as possible, that is really great. So that question, was that me or ChatGPT?
You.
Okay, and the final question is, do you have any final comments or thoughts you'd like to share?
Buy my book when it's out there.
Yeah, everyone should definitely
hire me.
Yeah,
hire me. Yes, I can help you.
Yeah, I think you definitely can, and I think we do need, genuinely need people like you in this space, being at the forefront of this kind of trauma sensitive and trauma informed work that's happening, because of your, like, not just because I know you and you're a great colleague to work with, that's definitely an added bonus, but also because you've got expertise, and you're one of the very few, like I mentioned at the beginning, who's on that Venn diagram of being a researcher and a therapist, and who's had years of extensive therapy training, trauma training, clinical experience, as well as working in organizations as a researcher. So I think people should definitely be coming to you for assistance with this, and I'm sure you can add a lot of value in this space. So was that question me or ChatGPT?
You.
Did you deliberately guess me for all of them?
No, genuinely, I couldn't tell. Like, it was either you and ChatGPT together
Mhm.
or you. So it
Okay.
felt very human. That's what I was trying to
Oh,
say.
that's really great. Maybe my ChatGPT is learning to be a bit more human, because question 4 was ChatGPT, which was what motivated you to write about trauma-informed research. Question 5 was ChatGPT. Can you share some key strategies or techniques from your book that researchers can employ to ensure their work is trauma-informed? Question 7, in your experience, what are some common misconceptions researchers may have about trauma and its impact on participants? Was ChatGPT. Question 8, how do you address power dynamics and potential re-traumatization within the research process, especially when working with vulnerable populations with ChatGPT? And question 9, how do you envision your book contributing to the broader dialogue surrounding trauma-informed care and research methodologies with ChatGPT? So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 10 questions with ChatGPT.
Passed. Like
Wow.
the Turing test.
The Turing
Passed. No, genuinely, usually I'm like very, like, you must have prompted it differently this time, have you?
No, the only thing, the prompt I used was, it's really strange. So the prompt I used was write some interview questions for a Gestalt therapist and user researcher who's written a book about trauma-informed research that will be published soon. I didn't know when it was going to be published, so I said soon. And the only thing I removed in some of those questions was where it referenced Gestalt, because we're not really talking about Gestalt therapy. So, for instance, I think one of the questions, question 5, about sharing key strategies or techniques. No, that one was fine. I think I might have just not included any of the. Oh yeah, that one. What mode? No, that was me. Was that me? Sorry, I'm just rambling now.
No, that's all right.
Oh yeah, what motivated you to write about trauma-informed research? That question. So that was ChatGPT, but it said, what motivated you to write about trauma-informed research from the perspective of Gestalt therapy? I just removed that part because we weren't talking about Gestalt therapy, but that first part was purely ChatGPT.
So, yeah, I think it's getting better. And what's interesting, I shared earlier a chart with you about research papers where the word delve suddenly exponentially increased, right?
Yeah.
So it's certain words that ChatGPT uses that are, very specific. Delve is one of them.
Yeah.
And there are a lot more. It's almost like I have a library of words and none of them were in this.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting.
So that's why I was confused. It sounded very new and all
well,
of it.
It's quite good that it did. Maybe it's like, maybe the more I use it, the more of my language it's picking up and starting to speak like that. And now I'm getting a bit scared that it is. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, that was a very kind of informative episode. That makes me sound so clinical. It was actually a great episode. I think it's going to help a lot of people, and I think it's going to help the community massively. I'm excited for your book to come out. I hope that everybody buys it. I hope everybody in the industry buys it and they really utilize your services, because like you, I'm a massive advocate of reducing harm. As a researcher, my primary concern is my participants, not the organizations I work for, and to ensure, although I do care about the organizations I work for, but I'm there for the participant and the participant's safety and the participant's needs. So I think this is very important, especially when sometimes researchers can be placed under pressure by their organizations to deliver and to get the answers and to get the results. And I think having these checks and balances that you're proposing is going to be a game changer for the industry. So I think it's great. And can I say that I've sampled some of the materials, so I kind of I have like kind of already seen some of it, so that's why I'm really advocating for it. It's not just based on the interview today.
Yeah, this was a collaborative effort. Like, a lot of people inputted it and backed into the book. So as long as my heart goes out to everybody who sometimes it's the small things that make a huge difference. And a lot of the people who I acknowledge in the beginning, they're all like, I haven't done anything actually. And I was like, yes, like the most important thing is like, facilitating that conversation in the first place, but yeah, I wanted to say thank you to you for reading and inputting on it. It meant a lot to me.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try not to discount myself, as my therapist would say, and accept the stroke, as my therapist would say. This is transactional analysis language. For those of you who don't know, it sounds strange, but if you know the language, you know exactly what that means. It just means I'm accepting the compliment and not saying, oh, it was nothing. I do feel like you've done the bulk of the work, and I do genuinely think my contribution was small, but I appreciate the acknowledgement. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, and I think we can leave it there. So everyone, keep an eye out for Iron's book, and when it's out, please do go buy it. Please do reach out to him. He's on LinkedIn. His article will be in the show notes, and we will put this episode out on social media too. So keep an eye out for it. Okay, thanks, Iron.
Thank you.